Hi, everyone. Welcome to our viewers, to our attendees. I believe we are now live. Thank you for everyone who's attending. Thank you for our panelists. We are very happy to host you here today to host this discussion, which is actually co-hosted by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, the Emirates Detainee Advocacy Center, and MENA Rights Group. We are here today gathered to speak about the state security apparatus in the UAE. I believe that this discussion is absolutely crucial at this point in time where civic space in the UAE is all the more non-existent. Behind the shining skyscrapers of Dubai, there is actually a very harsh and darker reality in the UAE. A massive crackdown against any form of critique of the government or political dissent. And we have actually decided to hold this webinar 3 days after the 50th anniversary of the creation of the notorious State Security Apparatus. This institution was actually created on June 10th, 1974. The state security is known to be the main institution that is actually responsible of the commission of human rights violations and the crackdown on political dissent. And I hope that this webinar will be an opportunity for us to reflect on the past 50 years, on the legacy of this institution, and especially the leading role that it has played over the past decade in the crackdown on peaceful dissent in the country. The SSA, as we call it, has actually acted as the right hand of the government to commit gross human rights violations and gross violations of the right to freedom of expression, mostly. Human rights NGOs who are present here in the panel have all documented the commission of terrible human rights violations that have been committed by the SSA, including torture, arbitrary detention, and enforced disappearance. So we are today joined here by experts on the matter, to say the least, who will surely be able to shed some light into the history, the modus operandi of this institution, and its legal framework. We will also dive into some, practical examples of human rights violations that have been committed by the state security, and the bigger question of accountability and what can be the legal avenues that we can pursue. So here with me today, I have Matthew Hedges, who is an academic and unfortunately a former detainee in the UAE. He was arrested and detained by the SSA in 2018 and falsely accused of spying for the UK. And I think he will tell you more about it, but he basically wrote the book on the state security. We also have with us Devin Kenny, who is the UAE researcher at Amnesty International. We have Joey Shea, who is the UAE researcher at Human Rights Watch. And we have Ahmed Nouaimi, who is an Emirati activist and member of the UAE 94. He will tell you more about this very famous case in the UAE. So this webinar will be, back and forth, round of questions. So I will open the debate and I will start by asking a question to Matthew. If you could give us an overview of the history of the state security apparatus, when it was created, how has it developed? And especially, I think this will be interesting for our viewers to talk maybe about how did it contribute into making the UAE an authoritarian state? The floor is yours, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Fala, and thank you very much, everyone, for making this event happen, and for those watching, thank you very much for attending. It is kind of difficult to really get to grips with how and when the state security was itself created and formed. You noted it was established in 1974. shortly, several years after the creation of the state. But not much was known really. Little to nothing was published. Little to nothing was really understood about the entity until much more recently. But ultimately, it's expanded from a sort of Praetorian Guard, a group, a security organization whose near sole focus, whose sole mission is to reinforce the stability, the security of the ruling families, and more specifically, the Abu Dhabi ruling family. Since the passing of Sheikh Zayed, the UAE State Security Apparatus has significantly increased its exposure, its footprint, its influence on across society, and this again took another spiral, another evolution, obviously after the Arab Spring, and then much more recently with the appointment of Mohammed bin Zayed as president. By having his eldest son, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Khalid bin Mohammed bin Zayed, as the Minister of State Security, it further reinforces and demonstrates how not only how power within the state is concentrated within a nuclear family, but that those security responsibilities are for those individuals as it concerns them. These tactics are not, they are by no means unique to the UAE. They just come in different guises. I suppose what is distinctive here is that the state security in a country with a very small citizen population, the power that they have is through their embedded nature across every part of society. For any cooperation engagement in the public sector, for any access to public services, even the fact that they sit ultimately above any laws that are designed, well, that are shown to limit maybe certain powers, they are an effective state within a state. There is apart from some of those elites in Abu Dhabi, everyone is under their purview. Everyone is susceptible to their application of power and authority should they need to. They are the antithesis. They are the opposite of a rule of law security governance system. Some great examples beyond what we are going to hear today from other speakers, what Ahmed can also help shine a light on when it comes to ordinary citizens, but to reinforce how this even targets other elite figures, was when the state security detained the ruler of Ras Al Khaimah and his brother, the head of police, following some very public outcries of dissatisfaction from Emirati citizens in Ras Al Khaimah because of the high number of deaths of soldiers in Yemen. But if the state security, if they can go to another emirate and simply detain, members of ruling families, this is probably the clearest and best demonstration of how extensive their power is.
Absolutely, and Matthew, you said something very interesting where you say it's the opposite of a rule of law situation, which would lead me to ask this question to Devin. We've seen that there is a very close connection between the SSA and the use and the misuse, actually, of counterterrorism law. Can you maybe give us more of an overview of what legal framework the SSA applies and what legal framework it applies to?
Yeah, thanks, Falah. And you're hearing me all right, yeah? Cool. Yeah, the interesting thing about the legal framework of the state security apparatus is that it doesn't have one. And here I'm just echoing what Matthew said, but that's because it doesn't operate within the rule of law. Surely a core part of the rule of law is that it's something that is available for the public to know about. The idea of how law functions is that it's a defined text fixed in writing that everyone can look at together and be seeing the same words so that it acts as a common standard that everyone can appeal to. But the text of the law on the state security apparatus isn't published. This got litigated out in an interesting way about a decade ago. The UN's special rapporteur on the independence of judges and lawyers was doing a report on the UAE in 2015. It was in circulation among Emirates watchers at the time that the law on the state security apparatus had never been published. And so the draft report criticized the UAE for not publishing it. The UAE had a chance to respond, and it did so by giving citations to the official gazette for that law. After that, the special rapporteur's report removed that line about the law being unpublished. But what a citation does is allow you to go and check. There's very few places you can go to find the UAE's federal official gazette, but the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. does carry it, so I went there to look. There's two statutes setting the law, Federal Law Number 2 of 2003 and Decree of Federal Law Number 1 of 2011. Unfortunately, the Gazette issue with the right date for when the 2003 statute came out wasn't in the library's collection, but the date and issue cited by the UAE for the 2011 revision was. But the law was simply not there where they said it was. It was just not there in the Gazette where they said it had been printed. So the special rapporteur's original draft was correct. The law has been kept secret by the state. The government hasn't released the law, but it has sort of entered into circulation. Amnesty International in 2014 got some kind of unofficial English translation of the 2003 version of the law, though we haven't published it. The Emirates Detainees Advocacy Center, EDEC, who are one of our co-sponsors for this webinar, they've obtained a scanned PDF of the 2003 version of the law that does appear to be something produced in a government office, and they've published that on their website. So I'm not saying that the EDAC text isn't authentic, but that's sort of beside the point. When it's time for lawyers to argue about the meaning of a law in court, the court looks to the officially published version of the law for its authentic text. Courts don't rely on legal sources that are unofficial and may contain discrepancies from the original. So the defense lawyer needs to have the same official instrument in front of him that the court has and that the prosecution has, so that they're all talking about the same text, which isn't up for dispute in terms of what it says. Any dispute is about how to interpret what it says. With an unpublished law, that's impossible. So a defense lawyer might try to object to something found in the EDAC published text by saying it's unconstitutional, or they might argue that a provision in the EDAC published text should be interpreted in a way that's favorable to their client, but the prosecution can just claim that those words aren't actually in the law. And how is the defense going to dispute that if they can't even see an official published text? And a court faced with that defense argument would respond correctly that a text published on an NGO website isn't the right source for a law. The right source is the officially produced text. So when you don't publish what is officially produced, all of this becomes completely scrambled and rule of law essentially falls out the window. On top of all that, even EDAC haven't been able to obtain the 2011 revision of the law. So we can look at provisions in the 2003 version that they have, and you can find concerns and raise problems with it. For instance, under Article 14.1b of the document that EDAC has, one of the things that the state security apparatus should be doing is investigating, quote, any activity damaging to the state's economy, whether inside or outside the state, end quote. We know that the UAE hacks into people's phones and spies on them. So under this text that we have, maybe something that the state security apparatus should be doing by law is spying on and hacking into the phones of editors of the Wall Street Journal or the Financial Times or The Economist because they let pieces be published in their pages, which are a little bit skeptical about the health of the Emirati stock market or economy more broadly, for example. But the law was changed in 2011 again, and so we have no basis to know which parts were changed. So for all we know, that provision or any other provision that we might choose to look at from the EDAC text is no longer the same. The revision of the law came in June 2011, which is well into the Arab Spring, which the UAE hated. So we can assume that the revisions were all in the direction of making the law more draconian. But what the law actually is, no one has any reliable way of knowing.
That's very interesting to say that, because yeah, it just seems like that the law is intentionally made to be confusing, to be vague, to be unpublished, to just create this kind of limbo where the state can, or a space where the state can commit any kind of human rights violation. And yeah, maybe we can go into the other round of questioning, which will focus more about the human rights violations. And I'll turn to you, Joey, if you can, we know that the SSA has been responsible of committing this massive human rights violations. And as we see, this lack of legal framework gives the possibility for the state and the SSA to do that. Has Human Rights Watch documented any such cases of human rights of violations?
Thanks, Falah. And unfortunately, at Human Rights Watch, at Amnesty, at all the organizations sitting around this virtual table right now, we have all unfortunately documented egregious human rights violations that are connected with the UAE State Security Apparatus. I'm going to focus specifically on one case of which we were able to get a number of details in terms of, fair trial due process violations. And that is, of course, the case of Ahmed Mansour. Ahmed Mansour is one of the UAE's most well-known human rights defenders. He is a current member of Human Rights Watch's MENA Advisory Committee and was a close personal friend of many of my predecessors at HRW and those sitting around, again, this virtual table right now. And unfortunately, from the moment that he was arrested in 2017 until the present day, there was one agency that has been entirely responsible for everything related to his unjust imprisonment. And that is, of course, the State Security Apparatus. We released quite a long report a few years ago in collaboration, a joint report with the Gulf Center for Human Rights on Ahmed Mansour's unjust trial. And we were able to get a number of these details of the due process violations, fair trial violations that occurred throughout Ahmed Mansour's trial. So I'm going to go through a number of those today. And we did determine that these violations originated from the SSA, and the SSA are ultimately responsible for these violations. And really, his trial, demonstrates how little the rule of law matters in the UAE when the SSA is involved, and because it, reports directly to the president. So just, to go through some of those violations, Ahmed Mansour was arrested in March 2017 in a very late raid on his house. About a year later, in May 2018, the Abu Dhabi Court of Appeals State Security Chamber sentenced Mansour to 10 years in prison on charges entirely related to his human rights activities. So his conviction was based off of the penal code as well as the abusive 2012 cybercrime laws, both of which criminalize peaceful criticism of senior officials, the judiciary, public policies, and it ultimately provides a legal basis to prosecute and imprison anyone who argues for political reform. And the basis of his conviction was, a lot of the evidence that was presented as the basis of his conviction was, in fact, Mansour's tweets about injustices in the UAE, his participation in international human rights conferences online, so events not at all dissimilar to the one that we are participating in right now. They used email exchanges and WhatsApp conversations with international human rights organizations, including Human Rights Watch, including the Gulf Center for Human Rights. So his trial started about a year after his arrest, approximately. And at each of the 5 hearings, Ahmed Mansour stated to the court that he was being held in solitary confinement and being denied other basic prisoners' rights, including access to phone calls and visits from his families. At least 3 of those hearings, the judge, in fact, ruled that authorities should grant Mansour these rights that are afforded to prisoners. But the judge's orders were unmet, and they were unmet based off of the orders of the State Security Apparatus. So even the somewhat of independence that the judge exercised in this case was superseded by the immense power of the State Security Apparatus. And again, at each of these hearings, they were incredibly short. The first 2 were 5 minutes long. Mansour was unable to view the documentation, the court documents against him, until a later hearing. And even when the judge granted him that ability, he was only able to view the court documents once within the supervision of the prosecutor. And again, even his appeal, we saw violations of due process and fair trial rights that were, again, the responsibility of the SSA. So yeah, the judge, again, during the appeal process, reiterated his decisions to allow and afford Mansour his basic prisoners' rights. But again, that decision went unmet because the SSA ultimately overruled it. So we see, in this very high-profile case, of which these details were very, very difficult to come by, both by Human Rights Watch and the Gulf Center for Human Rights. We see how egregious these violations are, and we were able to document that they were ultimately the responsibility of the SSA.
Thank you so much, Joey, and thank you for shedding light on this important case. And another very famous case in the UAE where the SSA is implicated is the UAE 94 case, which took place 10 years ago, a bit more than 10 years ago now, where a group of human rights defenders and lawyers and civil society actors have signed a petition to ask for democratic reforms, and they were sentenced to lengthy prison sentences. And here with us, we have one of the UAE 94 who was tried actually in absentia, Ahmed Noaimi. You have been tried for simply exercising the right to freedom of expression. I wanted to ask you if you could tell us more about the UAE 94 case in general. What was the involvement of the SSA in this case, and give us an insight on your own personal experience as well.
Yes, hi Falah, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to tell you about our story, and thanks for all the panels, people who actually covered many significant things in the United Arab Emirates society. Nowadays, we are facing really a great problem, and if I want to talk about this case, it's not the only one case in the United Arab Emirates. The case started with the 5 people, as you remember, the 5 Emiratis. One of them, Ahmed Mansour, you know about that, and he was released after they give him sentence for 5 years. Then they released him with a pardon from the president. But actually, the problem did not start in 2012. If we talk about the problem with this security department, it was started while the actually the power of this department become bigger and bigger. And one of the problem that I faced before that, and this is one of the story that had before this issue, the 1940 Emiratis. In 2010, I was banned from travel for 6 days, and that was really shocked the person who was telling me that at the airport I can't travel, I couldn't travel, and he did not have any reason for that. He just said that this is a security department said, yeah, you can't travel. And to know how power is that department, the person who was there could not even print out the paper to prove that he banned me from travel because of the security department. He showed me when he tried to print out the paper, the message comes that you can't print out this paper. So they can control everything, everywhere, any department, in the board, in the airport, at the airport, everywhere. Even that we understand at that time that the people could not be having a job without the permission from, even if they are citizen, from the security department. So the case of 94, it's the end of the story, telling us how the government give them this power so they can arrest those people and ban their family from traveling, from jobs, without any permission. Without any permission. It is like that. They came to their houses, they took them from there to the jail without even showing them the order from the general prosecutor or anything like that. So they have prosecution, general prosecution for themselves. We found out after that they have their special one. So after that, they took the people to the jail, which is security jail, and no one know where they were at the time, even the family, and no one can reach them. No one can, even the legal people, like their lawyers, they don't know how to reach them. In this case, show us actually how powerful they are. No one can even ask about them or find any information about them. Are they alive? Are they die? Anything happened to them? Are they sick? What is their situation? Where they are, no one could know. The first trial, so we can remember at that time, the first time that they appeared in the court, okay, which is actually security court as well. They control everything. The judge, at that time, the detainees asked the judge to tell the security department to take them from to that secret prison. So they did not do it until the second trial, and then they insist that the judge to do so, and the judge asked the security department to move them to the normal jail. Then after maybe 3 weeks, they moved them. Nowadays, with they can actually sue us with any after 12 years, and all the people they completed their sentences. They are facing a new trial with a new issue, which is terrorist issue as well, and they are now in security jail as well. When one of them, Khalifa al-Nuaimi, asked, and I want to show you the difference now. When he asked the judge this time, asking him that we are in a secret jail, in a hidden jail, in the security department jail, and we are tortured. So he told him, this is illegal jail, and you have to move us from there. The judge said, if it's in the country, in the UAE, it's legal. So we understand now how the power grows through this time until today. Sorry, I took more than my time.
No, no worries at all. No. Thank you so much for this testimony and for giving us more of an insight from someone who's from the Emirati civil society. And yeah, maybe just jumping on, since I know that you have to unfortunately leave early, and thank you so much for making the time nonetheless. But yeah, maybe just to ask you, what would be the expectations of Emirati civil society in light of all this?
Actually, the civil society now, they are facing big problem. Let me give you an example of that. Nowadays, you can't have any association, to establish any association without the permission of the security department. Even that you are a group of citizens, you want to do like, let's say, a new association for the families, not for something about the politics. No, about the family. You can't have it, and they check your name. If your name in the blacklist, and you can't know if you are in the blacklist or the white or the red, they have listed. Okay, you don't know, and you can't find out. So this is the problem. Now, what the people expect from that? The people now actually in a society that they are afraid even to talk negatively about anything in the United Arab Emirates, because the opposition is forbidden. Opposition having another opinion than the government, it's forbidden in the United Arab Emirates. And who is the guard of that is the security department. And the security department has all the power. They can take you without any permission, without any legal paper, take you from your house, and no one can know where you are. So the people there, they want at least this kind of environment and this kind of atmosphere, which actually the security department created in the United Arab Emirates. They want it to disappear now. They want to have their freedom, to have their opinion. So this is what they want. But can we see that in the horizon or anything in the future? No, we can't see it. Unfortunately, the security department gets power and more. And one of the example, as I said, the people of Al-Islah group, now they are facing, and one of them, me, actually, my name is there in this new trial, which is actually bigger than the first trial, and they are facing a death penalty. They are not facing any an easy punishment or something. Maybe they will extend their detained for maybe 1 or 2 years. No. It can be a death penalty. So as I said, nothing in the horizon, and we don't see a good future for the civil society in the United Arab Emirates, unfortunately, if this security department has this control.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. I mean, yeah, we hope that we are hopeful that that the issues around the state security will be resolved by the government, and that they will hear the plight of civil society soon. But thank you so much, Ahmed, for just sharing all of this and for making the time as well. Much appreciated. I turn to you again, Matthew, because you as well have been a victim of the state security apparatus. You were arrested by the SSA and you were sentenced in 2018 on bogus spying charges. How has the state security played a role in your arrest and also in your detention and in your sentencing?
So I'm I'm more than aware that I'm lucky to have survived, to not be in that system and be defenseless. I saw what was happening to others, and this was only a small slither of what has been reported elsewhere. But I was also given threats which were about as direct, not as about as direct. They were direct as they come against my family and myself. The state security took me to Abu Dhabi, blindfolded, from the airport. They had followed me for 2 weeks. They had hacked my phone when I was in the UK before I had even entered the country. And I was taken to the state security prosecutor, who is... Oh, I've forgotten his name. But I was taken to the state security prosecutor, and for a week I was held, no charges, with no greater purpose except for a phishing attempt to see what avenues they could use to try and make something stick. It then significantly increased when I was, this all changed with 2 new interrogators, and alongside those direct threats of physical torture and abuse, medication that they were giving me, and being completely, vulnerable to any form of pressure. You enter a mode of self-survival. But that was with me as a foreign citizen, and I was very lucky. I was able to find a way to inform the embassy where I was and what happened. I had been told that they could hold me for 6 months before they could take me to court, of which they can always simply extend it. I didn't meet anyone for 2 months, and that was after I was forced to sign a confession statement, and being kept in a room. At times they didn't let me sleep, deliberately so. They were persistently surveilling me both electronically and physically. There was someone with me at all times. In other rooms, I could hear people getting beaten sometimes. There was blood on the floor, on the walls, and I was told they could take me to an overseas base in Yemen or Eritrea. When I was taken to an open prison for one night by mistake, I met a man who said that he had been tied to a chair for a year and blindfolded, and he was an Emirati. So I know it's the tip of the iceberg, and I know that the people who are the most vulnerable are Emirati citizens themselves, because they're the ones that are supposed to be protected by the state doing it to them. These are stories that you hear when you think about the UAE state security is the equivalent of the KGB, the Soviet state security. When you think about the Stasi, the DDR, the East German state security, the Ministry of State Security in China, or the Revolutionary Guard in Iran, they are a rule unto themselves. They are a world unto themselves, and that repressive behavior, of course, we can hear and see evidence of physical acts, but from the guards themselves, the officers of the state security throughout the entire state, they are all victims of its own existence, because the repression, the control that it has, goes into it limits critical thinking. So it goes from physical punishment through to a restriction on cognitive performance, cognitive, abilities. They simply either choose not to look at issues, topics, to be rational, or they have rewired that ability to do so, which is that was fascinating for me to see that these people with such power were also as scared as others when they knew certain issues were either in discussion, being talked about, whatever. You could see their own fear, which was mind blowing.
Thanks so much, Matthew. Thank you for all this and sharing. Just sharing your story as well. It's quite moving. So thanks a lot for this, for taking the time as well. Just jumping again maybe to Devon. Throughout all of these discussions, we really see very tangibly how the SSA has played a crucial role in the detention, the arrests, in the crackdown on public dissent over the past decades. Could you tell us more about what's the current situation in the UAE? Has there been any developments very recently?
Sure. First, I just say thanks to Matthew for that really vivid description, which succeeded in getting across to me some fragment of what this is actually like. I mean, I think most of us in the professional human rights sphere deal with this at a certain level of abstraction. We don't think it's okay, but like the texture of what it feels like to be in such a terrifying alternative world is one of the hardest things to convey. It's always striking and god awful when it does come through a bit. So to your question, Falah, overall situation in the UAE today, overall it's a situation of very successful repression where state security doesn't so often have to step out of the shadows to make an example of someone because the lesson has already been given to society and everyone is just way too terrified to speak out. Ahmed referred to that. There hasn't been a single public protest march reported in the UAE for years upon years upon years. That is not normal. Even in Bahrain, which is plenty repressive, there are street protests every week at a minimum. The UAE has succeeded beyond most authoritarians' wildest dreams in eliminating dissent from society. Setting aside protests, things aren't even written about in the UAE. So take the press. The most prominent English language newspaper is The National. It was started about 15 years ago under the premise that it was going to push boundaries. The Financial Times had an interesting couple of paragraphs on The National last November saying that The National, quote, now commonly self-censors around nebulous red lines of banned coverage, according to people close to the paper, end quote. If they don't censor themselves, it'll be done for them. So under its operational law, the National Media Council, or now the Media Regulatory Office, change of names, has authority to, quote, forbid the printing, circulation, or introduction into the country of any printed material except with permission. That's a quote from the legal mandate issued by the ruler of Dubai. So every piece of writing coming into the country is subject to prior restraint censorship. In June 2022, one of the local Arabic language papers, Ru'ya, made the mistake of crossing one of these unclear red lines by publishing a piece about how Emiratis were complaining about higher gas prices. That's it, nothing more. In response, the paper, which is owned by the president's brother, was simply dissolved. Even with all that, the government does still feel the need at times to make a further example out of people. So last December, which was while the UAE was hosting every country in the world at the annual climate conference, it launched a new mass trial, which is really a re-mass trial of 84 people who are mostly already in prison from the previous mass trial of 94 people that happened in 2012 through 2013. The current trial, like the last one, is proceeding in almost total secrecy. We don't even know the names of all 84 defendants because the indictment has never been published. Right now in the world, there are court cases going on against Israel in the International Criminal Court, against the former president and current presidential candidate Donald Trump in the US courts, and against the current US President Biden's son. In all of those cases, you can read the indictments or complaints. It took me under 5 seconds on Google to find the US federal government's indictment against Trump for conspiring to overturn the 2020 election results. It's published on an official government website. But in the UAE, the indictment, this most basic structuring document for any criminal trial, in a case with 84 citizen defendants on trial at the same time, is kept secret, unpublished, invisible. Our assumption is that the state security apparatus is heavily involved in this trial at all levels, and I presume that if we could read the records of who the witnesses are and what they said, the state security apparatus would be heavily represented. But as with the law on the state security apparatus that I talked about earlier, these things remain concealed. The structure and the operation of significant parts of the law in the UAE remain concealed, which is just another way of saying that in the spheres where that is happening, there is no rule of law.
Thank you, Devin, for sharing your expertise. And I think the big conclusion of all this will be that there is no rule of law, as you said. But turning to you, Joey, and I think this is a question that might interest a lot of our viewers, the accountability avenues. In the face of all these human rights abuses that have been committed by the SSA, what can be legal or advocacy avenues to hold, the authorities accountable? And I don't know, can civil society, the UN, or any other organization play a role as well?
This is sort of the key question that underlies all of the brilliant testimony and commentary that we have heard today is what can we do, how we can be effective in our advocacy. Unfortunately, in the UAE, it is an uphill battle, and I think one of the most uphill battles of most states in the region. I also cover Saudi Arabia in addition to the UAE, and even in the context of Saudi Arabia, when there is a high-profile event that is announced, a partnership with a footballer, the questions that I get from journalists are immediately, how does this contribute to Saudi Arabia's whitewashing? We're used to that narrative being inextricably linked to the policies of the Saudi government. In the UAE, unfortunately, there is not that level of awareness of, number one, the reality of the human rights situation in the country, the extent of the oppression, and number two, the Emirati government has been so effective in their whitewashing strategy that we don't even get those questions. It goes by completely unnoticed. There are, celebrities that we know and love that announce, their partnerships with various government agencies. There was one announced quite recently with a well-known actor whose name I won't say. And is this in the media at all about this person, possibly, participating, aiding in an Emirati whitewashing effort? Absolutely not, because it's just not, when we think of the UAE, we think of, glitz, glamour in Dubai, and we don't think of Ahmed Mansour, we don't think of the UAE 94 case. And so in terms of accountability and justice, and even, basic awareness and commentary by states who should be, speaking out about the human rights situation in the UAE, it's incredibly challenging. Just to give one example, I was actually in the UAE a few weeks ago, about a month ago, And I did the rounds of a number of missions, embassies, foreign embassies, trying to, get them to raise the issue of this new trial, the mass trial case that Devin spoke so eloquently about. To number one, ask them whether they had even attempted to send trial monitors to the number of sessions that have been happening over the last many months, and to push them to see if they were planning on making any statements at all about this case, because so far, maybe I've missed something major, but I haven't seen any public statement from any government about the new mass trial case. Unfortunately, the reactions that I got in these rooms were abysmal. I felt like I was, sort of met with crickets when I asked about trial monitors. There was no attempt with any of the missions that I met with to send trial monitors to any of the sessions. There was no even consideration that there would be any public statement about the case. And I think the comparison, even with 10 years ago, is quite striking. As awful as the UAE 94 proceedings were, there were public statements, there were attempts to send trial monitors, there was attention from the media, and yet more than 10 years later, the exact same trial, in effect, is happening with very similar due process violations, and we have heard absolutely nothing about it from anyone. And embassy officials are surprised that I'm meeting with them and asking about the case. And they are shocked that we expect public statements of condemnation of these very basic violations. And this is because the UAE's whitewashing efforts have become so effective, and also the way that they have been able to leverage their economic and security relationships with key partners, both in the region and elsewhere. So as civil society, our work is cut out for us. I think that we, need to be pushing the UAE's allies, particularly the United States, the EU, the UK, these Western governments that enable the UAE's oppression, that sell weapons, that have strong economic relationships. All of these factors are hugely important in the lack of attention and commentary, public statements on this case. One, very public ask that Human Rights Watch has, that I believe Amnesty and everyone else around this table, is on the July 10th verdict date, which is when we expect the verdict to be announced in this case, is we need there to be trial monitors at that session. We need embassies, Western embassies, to even attempt to send trial monitors. I didn't even hear in my meetings that they had attempted or requested to send these monitors. There was just the assumption that it wasn't possible, or they just were not willing to get involved whatsoever, which is quite unique. I've worked on Egypt, I've worked on Saudi Arabia, and even in these contexts where it's very difficult to get traction on human rights issues, there is at least some willingness to, send monitors, to engage privately. And there's been no context that is as challenging as the UAE in this respect. So we need to push Western states in particular, and we also need to engage the media. The other thing that I noticed, and I know that it's challenging for journalists who are based in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, because their lives are sort of in the hands of these very repressive agencies, but there has been no coverage of this case. There has been no attempt from the journalists, from many of the journalists that I know, again, of trying to attend these sessions. And I think, of course, Emirati journalists who are there are at the most risk. Arab journalists who are based there are at similar risk. And so I think ultimately, not that a Western passport is the ultimate, protector, but it does afford you, more protection than other passports. And I do think that it is up to these high-profile news agencies that benefit from the tax breaks that they get from being based in the UAE, and other things to really double down and do their job and cover this case, because it is the second largest mass trial in the UAE's history. And I would challenge anyone who's watching to find coverage of this case in major outlets in the US who have significant presences presence on the ground in the UAE. I would challenge you to find at least one article about this case, because there is not, and they are not trying. And I understand, there's a lot happening in the region right now that makes it, attention is diverted away, but this trial is historic, and we need the media, the foreign media, to do their jobs.
Absolutely. No, it's you've raised very important things and very important points, and especially the fact that every time we meet with states, they actually don't know anything about the UAE. This is absolutely crazy, and I have witnessed this as well, and it's always very frustrating, and which makes these kinds of webinars and events all the more important. I'm not sure if we have any questions from the public. I think there are no questions, but maybe I can just follow up very briefly. One question for each panelist. If you can, respond in 1 minute, just to close the debate. And maybe I can ask a question for Matthew. I know, Matthew, that you are a UK citizen, a British citizen. You have given us a vivid account, as Devon said, of your story. Has the UK done anything regarding your case? Has there been any follow-ups? What about when you were actually detained?
The UK's relationship with the UAE and vice versa is at a historical low. There is little to no respect. There is no influence. My case, you have to understand, the Foreign Office and the UK government tries to avoid any responsibility at all times. So they only responded publicly and applied pressure where they could once it had gone public. They had tried for months to keep it quiet, but the only way that works is to go public, and that kind of links back to the accountability. When we've seen and heard, more broadly, issues of serious abuse by the state security, such as when Sheikh Issa was torturing a man, and torturing this Afghan rice dealer while he was held down by police officers and state security officials. Yes, the courts said he was innocent because he had a reaction to his medication or something mad and crazy like this. That had a significant political impact, which harmed relations with some Western partners. Same with myself and some others. When the UAE state security does get found out, with Pegasus more recently, that is when that's maybe the best opportunity to find a way to drive an acknowledgement of these abuses, of these systematic abuses, and find a way to force that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've also heard not almost a year ago, I think 9 months ago, that the UK has apologized to you, Matthew, for the torture acts that you have been subjected to.
It was for failing to identify evidence of torture,
which is even worse, to say the least. But yeah, thank you so much. And turning to you, Devon, maybe to give us more of a just to ask you a legal question as well. What is the legal framework that the UAE uses to charge and sentence or to arrest and detain all of these human rights defenders mostly?
There was a bit of a blip in the connection. I think the essence of the question was, what's the UAE's legal justification for detaining human rights defenders and so forth? I mean, in the UAE 94 trial, they were charged under a provision of law which relates to attempting to overthrow the government. But even that provision of law didn't include any element of force. So no necessary component of violence. Most people in that trial got 10-year sentences, and that trial concluded in 2013. So you can do the math. We've come up on the end of almost every single person's sentence from the trial, and yet they didn't get out of prison. That was done on the basis of a counterterrorism law, so-called, and specifically a provision about giving what they call counseling for people who hold or adopt extremist ideas. I'm giving you a nearly verbatim quote in translation from the Arabic text. And then lastly, this appears to be part of the motivation behind the UAE 84 trial now, which is curious, but it seems that part of the motivation is just to have a new sentence slapped on these people to keep them in prison under that, so that they don't have to keep applying the counterterrorism and counter-extremism counseling provision. I would presume because that's gotten some negative international references from like the UN and human rights organizations. I mean, it's a curious logic. It's all so far removed from anything that's actually recognizable as legality. You wonder why they bother. And I think another reason for it is just the demonstration effect of showing society that they're going to continue to punish these dissidents. But yeah, those are these slender legal reeds, such as they are, on which they've hung their cases.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks so much, Devin. And maybe a last question to you, Joey. Yeah, you've talked about some mostly, approaching allied states of the UAE. What about, legal avenues? Is there a way to use universal jurisdiction, use international courts? Is there anything that is concrete for victims that they can actually use? Is there something open or possible?
It's a really interesting question, especially universal jurisdiction. I think all of these, even international legal avenues, still require political will, and a political will to publicly go against the UAE in a very aggressive way. And I think, unfortunately, in this particular moment, that political will really doesn't exist. And I don't want to be too cynical about those legal avenues, because I think they are important to explore. But I think what is a sort of precursor to those possibilities is working on the countering this whitewashing that has happened, and allowing for the possibility that states may take a stronger line to the UAE. It's obviously, like I said, an uphill battle, and I think it will take many, many years. But I think, there needs to be a political will for those avenues to be explored. And at this point, I don't see that political will being there. And I think, unfortunately, with the terrible, terrible violations that are happening in Gaza at the moment, and the way that the UAE has positioned itself, it's even harder to get that traction. But we have to push, even if it's challenging. And I think that starts with targeting the people whom have themselves been targeted by the UAE in terms of their whitewashing efforts. So doing much more outreach and work with celebrities and companies and athletes, and sports people, you can tell that I'm not a sports person by using the word sports people, who have made these big deals with the UAE and either criticizing them publicly or starting with private advocacy and educating them on the reality of the human rights situation in the country and how they are becoming complicit in those violations and actively, covering them up.
Thank you so much. I think these are very thoughtful, food for thought for our viewers to end this webinar. And yeah, I just want to thank our panelists for taking the time, for sharing their stories, sharing their expertise with us. I want to say we hope we won't see each other again, hoping that there won't be any more violations that are being committed. So yeah, thank you so much to everyone and to all our viewers, and please keep in touch, I guess.
Thanks all, everybody. Have a good morning and or evening or whatever.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.